Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Everyone's got their opinion on the new regulations for this season. Yes, they have, on paper, improved the following of cars in front, made the racing better, but Mercedes believe that because the cars are so much easier now to overtake slower cars in front, it actually makes the races more predictable and arguably less exciting from a viewer perspective. Do they have a point, or are they just frustrated that Max Verstappen is winning everything from any position on the grid? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Really helps out the channel. Thank you very much indeed for doing that one on the verge of 9k as well. Let's keep on going. Firstly, new potentially Alpha Tauri driver Nick de Vries for next season is getting ready maybe to drive in Singapore again. Of course, he replaced Alex Albon, who was unwell with appendicitis most recently in Monza. He may have to do the same again in Singapore. Alex Albon, I believe, is okay. He's recovering in Monaco, but he may or may not feel well enough to drive in Singapore because it's a tough race, very physical race, like super hot and humid. That's why you can see here Nick de Vries is preparing in his Nordic outfit, like working out in, well, let's just say winter clothing to emulate the conditions in Singapore in a few weeks' time. But yes, he may need to drive, he may not, but he's getting ready just in case. And next season we expect him to be in the AlphaTauri seats. That is the way the present rumours are lining up. Now, McLaren, of course, Piastri is going to be their driver next year, but he might not be allowed to drive for McLaren in the upcoming FP1 practice sessions. So every team has to give a couple of rookies a chance in their car for FP1 sessions throughout the season. Some teams have done that so far, some teams have not. So there are some options for McLaren. If they can give Piastri the chance, they probably will, but Alpine might not let him do that based on whatever weird contract ramblings are currently going on there. So there is the possibility, of course, of a couple of the McLaren IndyCar guys, Alex Plo, Pato O'Ward, potentially getting their chances. Could be pretty interesting for some of the upcoming races. So that's a possibility, but it would be kind of nice to see Piastri in a McLaren at kind of FP1 session by the end of the year sometime. Might not happen though. Now, speaking of McLaren, Daniel Ricciardo, of course, doesn't really know where he's going to go next season. There have been some rumours circulating that he could potentially get a reserve seat somewhere, even for something like Mercedes. Like, it's interesting with Ricciardo, right? Because such an exciting, fantastic driver a few years ago, and McLaren seems to have effectively taken the life out of him. Can he still get back to that level that he was at before in a new car? Maybe, maybe not. But based on his disappointing performances in the McLaren this season, they haven't really got any better also over the last couple of races since it's been clear that he's not going to be driving for them next season. Like, no other team really wants to give him a go. So potentially a year out, potentially a reserve seat somewhere. There has been some talk about Mercedes, right, and whether that would be a possibility to just be a reserve driver for them, like someone sitting there on the sidelines. And of course, Daniel Ricciardo probably well knows that if he does take a year out, his chances of returning to Formula 1 are rather slim. Like, it's certainly possible if the rookies, let's say, don't perform. But as he describes here, he is keeping every option open for next season. So I guess he still wants to be on the grid somewhere, but it might not be in a starting seat. That's certainly how it seems at the present time. Let's talk about the races still to go then. So Singapore, Mexico, well, it goes Singapore, Japan, US, Mexico, Brazil, Abu Dhabi to close out the season, of course. We expect Verstappen to lock up the title in probably Japan. Could happen next time out in Singapore, but unlikely. Now, Mercedes, of course, have had a hard time this season after dominating the previous several seasons. They're now, of course, they haven't got a victory yet. They got one pole position at the hands of George Russell back in Budapest. Since then, not been particularly good, ups and downs. They've had some chances here or there, for example, in Zandvoort to potentially win. Never worked out for them in the end. Max Verstappen has dominated from any position on the grid in the last few races. And of course, it's the quali pace that's kind of hurting Mercedes. They've got to figure out what they do next year, what their car looks like. A crucial couple of months for Mercedes to decide what their issues really are, how they're going to resolve them in terms of development for next year's car, what concept they go for. I'm sure they have more of an idea behind the scenes there than they're going to tell people publicly. So we shall see, of course, in due course what they come out with. But Mercedes have been raising the question about the kind of effectiveness of these new regulations. It definitely is true that these regulations, the way the cars are now designed, with the ground effect generating a fair bit of the downforce, the cars are no longer as boxy as they used to be, especially the rear wing design, for example, that really would, really distort the air coming off the back of the car. That meant in, let's say circuits like Brazil, it was really difficult to follow in the middle sector a car in front of you because all the air being worked off that car in front. You couldn't really generate the same downforce with your car's aerodynamics that the car in front of you can. Therefore, you have less downforce, have to go slower, and that really hurts the potential of overtaking when you can't follow closely through the corners. This year, it's clearly much better. Many tracks, Budapest, Zandvoort, even Monza to some perspective, that were really difficult for overtaking in previous years because you couldn't follow as closely especially through certain corners. By the time you get onto the straight, you were too far back to really make a pass. This year, very different story. Passing is much more achievable. Circuits are less of a procession than they used to be. And from one perspective, that's a great thing. You know, races like Zandvoort and Budapest were really entertaining. Lots of great overtakes, largely because of the way the new regulations are designed. And we've got many great moments, right, with so many cars close to each other. You know, the through goes Hamilton moment. I'll show you guys another couple of ones in a second where the new regulations helped. But in terms of race results and creating crazy results like Ocon winning in Budapest a couple of years ago, or 2021, and also, for example, Gasly winning in Monza, or even Perez winning in Sakir a couple of years ago, these results might not happen if overtaking is easier, such that faster cars that find themselves further back will eventually get to the front much quicker than they used to be able to. And Mercedes has made this point to say, look, the regulations make following easier, but they also make the races more predictable. Cars can start pretty much wherever on the grid, and because it's easier to overtake, Verstappen can do, 4-5 moves in a single lap at times, and, especially around the circuit like Spa, where they're much quicker anyway, the kind of following isn't so much of a big deal. Therefore, by the time Verstappen gets onto an overtaking opportunity, he can execute those time and time again. Actually makes the races more predictable. Do Mercedes have a point, or are they just kind of salty that it's not their car that's the fastest anymore? These are the words that Andrew Chauvelin said. He says, look, the following is a little bit easier. There are some circuits where historically you had very little overtaken, like Budapest, and the race there was a bit more interesting. You've also got the effect that when you bring in new rules, that when they're completely new, like this set, it does sort of reset the competitive order. We haven't quite got the close racing now. It looks like Red Bull have emerged as the clear frontrunner, so races are a bit more predictable than they were, perhaps at the back end of last year when it was super back and forth between Hamilton and Verstappen especially, but it's a small step in the right direction with an awful lot of change to get there. And maybe the big one that we'd hoped for that I don't think we've seen is the field closing up, which may happen over time with budget cap restrictions and more wind tunnel time for the lower seeded teams. Like, hopefully can close up the field over time, create the possibility of a car that isn't a Red Bull or a Ferrari or maybe a Mercedes winning a race. It's still broadly similar in terms of order from front to back, and of course next year there are some further changes. But kind of as I say, it seems less likely now that yes, you might get better racing in terms of wheel-to-wheel action, but you don't necessarily get the crazy results where, an Ocon or a Gasly or a Perez can win a race in a car that wouldn't be expected to, because they're probably going to get overhauled with overtaking now much easier. And we've kind of seen that to a certain degree in the previous races, but I definitely think these regulations have been a step in the right direction. Moments like this, right, I think this was on the second start back at Silverstone, when they're going 4 wide here through Farm and into Chapel. There was also this moment, you guys might remember, I believe, from Austria, where there was like 5 cars all going into turn 3 together. So there's been some moments like this which wouldn't be possible without the new regulations. And this is true by the numbers as well. You look at these numbers here from Giuliano De Kessler, he points out that back in Budapest, for example, the car overtake pace advantage you had to have before was about 1.5 seconds. You needed to be 1.5 seconds quicker per lap than the car in front, because you lost so much time during the heavy downforce sections by trying to follow the car in front that by the time you got onto the straight, there really was no chance to overtake. This year, you only needed a fraction of an advantage to actually make the overtake happen. Shows that the regulations have worked as intended. But do they actually make the races more entertaining? That is a question that Mercedes are raising here, because, for example, at Monza, right, the grid was all out of order. Verstappen was starting 7th, there was Hamilton P19, Sainz was P18, Perez was, P13 or something, and at the end of the race, what do you know? You've got the 2 Ferraris, you've got the 2 Red Bulls, the 2 Mercedes in the top 6. So you would think that maybe, especially in previous seasons, if you've got cars starting 19th, 18th, whatever, and the Mercedes isn't even that quick, especially around a circuit like this, to finish 5th anyway and have, Perez end up in 6th and all the top teams at the top, it's kind of it's not exactly anticlimactic, but the races are, as a result, more predictable maybe than they used to be, especially in terms of making progress in the field. At Spa was really the quintessential example here. The fact that Verstappen started 14th and was within 14, 18 laps or so, leading the race comfortably and was going to win clearly. Obviously Verstappen had the best car, was the best driver that weekend, and around a circuit like Spa where overtaking is possible, but it was almost too easy that he was able to go from P14 to the front in the blink of an eye. Comparing that, for example, to Brazil 2021, when Hamilton started 10th in the race, of course, managed to get up to win the race at the end of it, but it took him pretty much all race Hamilton to win it, right? He had the fastest car, he had the rocket ship engine in, he was obviously driving spectacularly, and if not for the whole Verstappen turn 4 incident, he might have won the race easier. but it took him pretty much the entire race in last year's regulations with clearly the fastest car to overhaul everyone in front of him and win, right? It took him many laps to get up to P2 and then eventually got Verstappen for the win. But with this year's regulations, with a car with that much performance differential, Hamilton would probably been leading that race within about 15 laps. It wouldn't have taken him 55 laps or whatever, how many it actually did to end up getting the lead of the race. So do you guys think this is a problem, or is this kind of like a natural evolution of the way things are going? You can't have it both ways in some sense. If it's going to be easier to overtake, which I think surely is a good thing, it probably means you get more predictable results when one team is far better than another, right? And many mentioned that back in Spa, Verstappen could have started from the pit lane and still won the race. I think he could almost have started half a lap down and still won the entire race, right? Such was his advantage on the field at that particular weekend. And with the new regulations making overtaking easier. So, I mean, look, I think this is a good thing. I think really what we're hoping for here is that the grid actually is closer in terms of performance, because as it is now, even a car that's maybe half a second faster per lap than the car in front, like, they can make the overtakes happen this year when they wouldn't necessarily have been able to in previous years. So the kind of finishing positions are maybe far more predictable than they used to be, especially if cars are starting out of order. But I think maybe that's the price you pay for better wheel-to-wheel racing. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.